Here at the Leadership Institute, and I guess I'll start off by talking about how it's actually harder to be in leadership these days. Contrary to popular belief, I actually have a pretty good relationship with Speaker Boehner. And I think that the type of leadership he offers is good leadership for a previous generation. It doesn't work as effectively with our current generation. And the reason it doesn't work as effectively is because of the internet. About 10, 20 years ago, if you were a leader in Congress, if you were the Speaker of the House, you could basically run the show. If you wanted to put some pressure on the rank and file to vote a certain way, you could really exert that pressure, because there was no good way for rank and file members to get their message out to the public. It was very difficult. If you had an opinion that was different from leadership, or if you wanted to expose something that was going on, you had to have your local news cover it. And even if you got some reasonable coverage, it wasn't going to spread very far. It would just be local. You wouldn't get much coverage for what you were doing. And in the modern era, if one of us has an opinion that's different from leadership, we're able to post it online, and everyone in the world can see it. And so the job of being Speaker of the House is very different from the job today, from the job of being Speaker of the House 10 or 20 years ago. And I think it presents some interesting challenges to the political party system that we have. I think as time goes on, we're going to have more and more independent members of Congress. And you actually are tending toward a situation where I think in the not too distant future, you may see the political parties break down in some sense. Is this a good or a bad thing? I don't know. Our system, some people talk about having a parliamentary system like many countries in Europe have. Our system generally relies on people to form coalitions ahead of time, and then you form two solid coalitions and you go and duke it out. In other systems, they simply have different parties and then they form coalitions after the fact. So I'm not sure that they're all that far off, but at least in terms of the organization. But I do see a situation in the future where people can just be independent, they can run on their own records, they can go present their own views to the public, and win or lose elections on their own merit. And to me, that's a positive thing. If you look within the Republican Party right now, there is a strong streak of libertarianism rising up that also wasn't there 10, 20 years ago. And the issues that many libertarian Republicans are talking about, and perhaps viewed as more moderate on than their predecessors, are things like gay marriage, immigration, foreign policy, civil liberties, corporate welfare, cronyism, transparency. These are differences, I think, between the new generation of Republicans and many of the previous generation. That's not to say that every person who is a new Republican is a libertarian Republican or supports any one of these issues or has a particular position on any of these issues. There are many young Republicans who are not supportive of gay marriage still. But I would say when you talk to young Republicans, that is a big change in the party. There's a big transition on that issue and a number of these other issues, particularly civil liberties issues in general. When you talk about things like the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows even Americans to be detained indefinitely right here on the homeland. Someone can come into your home, grab you, detain you indefinitely without charging you with a crime or giving you a trial, simply because you're suspected of being a terrorist. That's outrageous. And it basically makes a mockery of our Constitution. And it's these new Republicans, these more libertarian-leaning Republicans, who are bringing this front and center. A few years ago, I would have said I was feeling pretty alone in politics, but that's not the case anymore. There are the godfathers of sort of this independence/libertarian movement. Those would be Ron Paul and Jim DeMint. Ron Paul in the House and Jim DeMint in the Senate. But now we have a lot of people who are trending in this direction. Thomas Massey, he's a fantastic new congressman out of Kentucky. We have Mick Mulvaney and Raul Labrador in the House. We have Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Ted Cruz. They are making a huge impact, and I really believe that the future of the Republican Party is tending in their direction, in my direction, in our direction, a more pro-liberty direction, a strong belief in following the Constitution and defending personal and economic freedom. In the short run, though, we still face a lot of challenges. As I said, I think we're now better able to get our message out there, but things are still slipping under the radar, but not as easily. One of these things I want to talk about is a vote we had a few months ago that was no budget, no pay. And I really think this is one of the most misleading bills that we've voted on in a long time. It was put out there as a positive effort to try to get the Senate to pass a budget. And a lot of conservatives rallied behind it. I'm sure if you watched conservative media, there was a lot of support for it out there. I actually don't do as much news watching anymore because I find it disturbing a lot of the time. The facts are almost always wrong, no matter which news channel you're watching. But no budget, no pay was presented to the public as something that would be a positive. We would get the Senate to pass a budget. We would get Congress to finally have a budget, and if we didn't have one, no one in Congress would get paid. Well, there are a lot of problems there. First, the 27th Amendment prohibits varying the pay of members of Congress. So you already can't do no budget, no pay because of the Constitution. And there's an important reason the 27th Amendment doesn't allow you to vary the pay of members of Congress. This is during the term. You can vary it between terms, but you can't vary it during the term. And the reason is that the founders didn't want members of Congress to be bribed or blackmailed. And if you could vary their pay, you could have the administration, or leadership even, tell members of Congress, we will give you some money or we will take away some of your money, depending on whether you vote yes or no. And nobody wants that. When I go back home and I tell my constituents, would you like me to decide whether I vote yes or no on the basis of whether I received a bribe or was blackmailed? Nobody thinks that's a good thing. They want me to vote yes or no based on principles. They want me to vote yes or no based on the Constitution, not on the basis of whether I received money or had money taken away from me. So that's an important impediment. But the bill was actually written so that Congress didn't have to have a budget. If the House passed the budget, all of the representatives would get paid. If the Senate passed the budget, all of the senators would get paid. And to this day, Congress still has no budget. There is no budget. But every member of Congress has been paid. So no budget, no pay was passed, signed into law. Congress has no budget. Every member has been paid. But that's not the worst part of the bill. That's not the most misleading part of the bill. The worst part of the bill is that hidden in the bill, though rarely talked about, was a debt ceiling suspension. So the bill was written so that from the time of its signing until May 19, the debt ceiling would be suspended. that means it just wouldn't exist as a matter of law. And the amount of money borrowed between the time of the bill's signing and May 19 would automatically be added to the debt ceiling on May 19. So it got almost no coverage in the news, but a couple Sundays ago, on May 19, the debt ceiling was increased by over $300 billion. Now, I don't think I saw any news stories actually mentioning that. I mentioned it on my Facebook page, which I encourage you to check out. I explained every vote there. But I explained it on my Facebook page, and I got over 4,500 shares. Because people were incensed. How could the debt ceiling have been raised more than $300 billion and no one even mentioned it? And of course, this was part of the strategy of no budget, no pay. The real point of no budget, no pay was to increase the debt ceiling without having anyone know about it. It was to kick the debt ceiling fight down the road. And by kicking the debt ceiling fight down the road, of course, that meant increasing the debt ceiling in some way that wasn't really obvious to everyone, and passing something like no budget, no pay to disguise the whole thing. So we had a debt ceiling increase that most members of Congress voted for, the president signed, and really nobody got any bad press for it. $300 billion. Now, I'm from the state of Michigan. The annual budget for the state government of Michigan is about $50 billion. So we're talking about 6 times the annual state budget of Michigan. That's how much was borrowed and was added to the debt ceiling. And Michigan's a large state. It's one of our biggest states. So these are the kind of things that are going on behind closed doors. But as I said, fortunately with the internet and with great new members of Congress, Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, these things are being exposed. And I see a bright future actually for our country if we can get more and more of these individuals elected into office. People want transparency, they want openness. My constituents aren't clamoring for me to agree with them on everything. They understand that people don't agree on every issue. What they really want to see is that you're open and honest with them about what you're doing. That you don't do things in the dark, that you are who you are. And when you say you stand for something, you do stand for it. There's nothing, for those of you who are interested in doing campaign management, there's nothing that the public hates more than hypocrisy. They hate hypocrisy. I hate hypocrisy. So if there's one lesson you learn, it's be straightforward with people, be honest with them, and you'll actually get the benefit of the doubt even when they disagree. So I want to thank you for having me here. I want to open it up for questions, and we can talk a little more about some of these issues and other issues. Thanks so much.
In the back, man with red tie. Thanks, Congressman. My name is Mike Stopp from the great state of Oklahoma. Yesterday, Salon.com, there was an op-ed piece by Michael Lynn. The question was, the title was, "The Question Libertarians Just Can't Answer." And
I'll answer it.
And the question essentially is, why are there no libertarian countries? How would you address that question?
Why are there no libertarian countries? Well, there is a country founded on libertarian principles. It's called the United States of America. I mean, when people ask me, what's your political philosophy, I say I'm a constitutional conservative, I'm a libertarian Republican, I'm a classical liberal. To me, those mean the same things. When I talk about being a conservative, what I'm trying to do is conserve the founding principles of this country. And the founding principles are classical liberal principles, libertarian principles, as many people would call them today, a belief in limited government and economic freedom and individual liberty. Yeah, we have the perfect example of a libertarian system right here in the United States. Now, we have people who have corrupted that system, but this is an example of a libertarian country. And when you put those principles in place, we became the wealthiest, most powerful country on earth.
Here, here.
Hey, Matthew here. The internet has really democratized our system, where you now have a national following if you're someone like Rand Paul or Marco Rubio or you. What is the disconnect, or what's the difference between a national following and what you see in your own district when you go back and speak to your own constituents?
Well, when you say disconnect, what do you mean?
Well, so the difference. You may have, I like Thomas Massey and you and Rand on
Yep.
Facebook, and I can comment and converse with other folks who like you guys. Is there a difference when you go back to the district, or is it the same slice of supporters?
Yeah, I can't, I can't speak for all the other individuals who I would consider more libertarian-leaning Republicans. When I go back to the district, I'm who I am here today. I'm no different. I say the same things. When I speak in my town halls, I give the same messages. And I have won 2 elections with overwhelming support. So I don't, for those who are afraid of speaking out as libertarian Republicans, there's no need to be. I say I'm a libertarian Republican. I'm proud to be a libertarian Republican. In fact, part of my goal in using that word a lot, libertarian, is to change some of the connotations. Sometimes it's had a negative connotation, or people just don't understand what it means. They're not sure if you want any government, or they don't really follow what it means. And I've tried to change that in my own district, and I think it's been very effective. People understand it, they respect it, they see it as actually a very moderate philosophy. They see me as someone who's bipartisan, and I think it's developed a good connotation.
Ma'am? No, got her, right.
I wanted to ask you a question as a libertarian. Some of the language I've heard used surrounding the libertarian movement, particularly the civil liberties, kind of mirrors the language of the euthanasia movement. If you talk a little bit about that, and then also tell a little bit about the hostility conservative candidates face when they step forward.
Yeah, I can't comment on your first one. I don't know the context or the reference. But what was your second question?
Difficulty conservative candidates face when they step forward. Do you feel that sometimes there's hostility by the press, by people in the other party, that if you're going to step forward into the public arena, you may be faced with?
Yeah, that's true, although it's not just true for conservatives. I think it's true for anyone. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, you're always going to face a lot of scrutiny. And most of the time that's a good thing for our system. We want our public officials to face scrutiny. If anything, I think public officials don't face enough scrutiny. The problem is there tends to be too much focus on their personal lives and not enough focus on how they're voting, and how many of them are destroying the beautiful system we have here. If there was more focus on that, that would be a positive thing.
Gentleman in the black shirt. You got it right there.
Oh, here.
Is that dark? Is that dark
Blue,
blue?
dark blue.
Dark blue.
Steve Lane from Tennessee. Since you brought it up, who do you think would be a good fit for speaker in this more modern age that you refer to?
Raul Labrador. I voted for Raul Labrador for speaker. He's one of my colleagues from Idaho. And I think he'd be a fantastic Speaker of the House. I think someone like Mick Mulvaney would be fantastic. They have excellent leadership skills. They have an ability to work with people across the political spectrum. I mean, undoubtedly, if you're a Speaker of the House, you've got to work with a very diverse group of individuals. I think actually a lot of the more libertarian-leaning Republicans are better at doing that, if anything, because they are so used to being chastised and sort of persecuted in some sense, that they are more sympathetic to people who have diverse viewpoints and are more willing to work with them.
This gentleman right here in the front.
Thank you so much for coming. Over the last year or two, I've turned a lot of my friends and family onto your Facebook page, and we love reading your explanations for your votes. And I wonder when we read these things that it'll explain, well, this vote was unconstitutional and it's cronyist and it's terrible and it provides a special interest with everything. It passed 398 to 2. And, I love it. We share these things on Facebook, but do all these other 398 members of Congress, are they calling you a liar? Or do they, what is their explanation when you clearly explain that, this is unconstitutional, this is a big government, liberal, and then the Republicans are all voting for it? How do they explain that? Do they disagree with you?
Well, the truth is that a lot of times members of Congress are not very informed about the legislation they're voting on. And I'd say that is the biggest impediment to sound voting. It's not that people are intentionally trying to harm the country. I'd say most of my colleagues on the Republican side have very good intentions. The problem is you have a system that is so top-heavy where even now with the internet, you still have a very top-heavy system where leadership and committee chairmen control the process. They have the information, they have the resources to actually review these bills thoroughly. A lot of my colleagues, if they are heavily involved in some particular issue, it's hard for them actually to deal with a lot of the other issues. And some of them have districts that are very far away or very big. They spend a lot of time working their districts and doing a lot of other things. So they're not spending as much time as necessary reading the legislation, understanding the policy. When a leadership or a committee tells them that this bill does X, Y, or Z, they tend to believe it, and a lot of times it's the only information they have. For someone like me, it's hard for me as one individual to get the information out about each bill we're voting on. I only have a staff of a few people in DC, so we don't have we don't have a huge legislative staff. I've got maybe 4 people working on legislation total. So
maybe they should read your Facebook post.
There's not that many people who are able to go and get the information out to my colleagues. I certainly can't go to the floor and work every colleague. There's 435 members in the House. So I do what I can to get information out there, but it's certainly a lot easier for leadership and committees to get it out there. And a lot of times it's bad information.
Over here.
So you were, you speak about leadership. You mentioned that you didn't vote for John Boehner, you voted for Raul Labrador. You were kicked off the budget committee for wanting to balance the budget. How important would it be to replace our current Speaker of the House with someone who is more conservative? Is this something that we should be funneling our efforts to, or would those efforts be too difficult to bring to fruition? Would we need some House of Cards chicanery to replace our Speaker?
No. Absolutely not. I watch House of Cards, so I want to be clear again. I like John Boehner. Do I think he's the most suited person for modern times, for the kind of Republican Party we have today? No. But we could do a lot worse. We could do a lot worse. And I would not want to be instrumental in bringing John Boehner down for the sake of putting someone else at the top who might be worse. So we should be very careful about that. I think that things will happen on, I think it'll happen on its own pace. As the party evolves, there will be more and more people who want a new kind of leadership, and that'll happen on its own. So I don't think there should be any sort of grassroots movement to eliminate our current speaker. And as I said, I like him personally. I actually think he's pretty straightforward. He's direct. He says what he means. You just have to listen very carefully. And there are a lot of other people who could be Speaker of the House who will not be as direct or straightforward with you.
All the way in the back, in the corner. Sort of on the far right back there.
Okay, even though you are more on a federal level, how do you feel about Detroit appointing a emergency financial manager? And would you ever consider a Senate run in 2014 in Michigan?
I am considering a Senate run. I have not made a final decision on that yet. As for the emergency financial manager position, I think it's a tough call. I believe very strongly in allowing and encouraging local control to the extent possible. I'm a federalist. I believe that you should have different levels of government doing different things, and I want Detroit to manage its own affairs. On the other hand, a city is really a creature of the state under state law. And if a city goes bankrupt, the state is on the hook for it. So the state of Michigan has to take that into consideration when it decides what to do with Detroit. Because if Detroit goes under, it's not just Detroit that's going to have difficulty. Taxpayers in my district are also going to have to pay for it. So that's why there are pros and cons. And I'm not close enough to the situation to know what the right answer is, but I certainly understand both arguments.
Up here.
Would you care to comment, give any observation what you might think